In February 2009, Pamela Butler vanished from her Washington, D.C. home without a trace. Despite her family's desperate search, no answers would come. But what if the man they trusted the most was hiding a far darker secret? Pamela, a successful and vibrant woman in her mid-40s, had built a life many admired. A supervisor at the Environmental Protection Agency, she owned a beautiful home, 2 luxury cars, and was known for her infectious laughter. But despite her success, she felt a void, longing for love, and found it in a man she met online, Jose Rodriguez Cruz. A former military police officer, their romance blossomed quickly, and soon he was welcomed into her family. But then, something went terribly wrong. Pamela never showed up for dinner with her mother on Valentine's Day. Her family found her home eerily quiet, the blinds drawn in a way that was unlike her, and mail piling up outside. Surveillance footage, however, offered an unsettling clue. Pam had returned home 2 days before, but no footage showed her leaving. And the mystery deepened when Jose Rodriguez Cruz, the man closest to her, was seen entering and exiting her home in the days that followed. But the story didn't end there, because the man Pamela trusted most, Jose Rodriguez Cruz, was hiding a deadly secret. And that secret stretches back decades. Pamela Butler, a woman of independent success, had everything in life, yet there was still one thing she sought: a partner to share it with. For months, she had been seeing Jose Rodriguez Cruz, a man she met online. Their relationship was new, but things appeared to be progressing well. As Valentine's Day approached in 2009, Pamela made plans to take her mother, Thelma Butler, out for a special dinner, a gesture of affection that seemed to reflect her caring nature. Yet, what should have been a simple, celebratory evening for a mother and daughter soon turned into a devastating mystery. On February 14th, Pamela had promised her mother she would pick her up for dinner, but when Thelma eagerly waited, there was no call, no text, and Pamela did not arrive. It was unlike Pamela to miss a commitment, especially one with her mother whom she was close to. Concern quickly grew. By the following day, Thelma's worry deepened as she was unable to reach Pamela on her phone. This was out of character. Pamela was always reliable, dependable, and easy to get a hold of. Something was terribly wrong. Thelma, along with Pamela's nephew, Brandon, went to Pamela's home, hoping to find her and resolve the unease with a simple explanation. What they found upon arrival was anything but reassuring. Pamela's house, a place of comfort and order, was disturbingly out of place. The usually meticulous home was now chaotic. Mail, which should have been inside the house, was scattered on the doorstep, adding an ominous touch to the growing mystery. As they entered the home, they noticed more signs of disorder. Papers were strewn across the floor, an unusual sight in a house that was always kept neat. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no broken objects or overturned furniture, but the atmosphere was unsettling. The blinds in one window had been raised from the bottom, a detail that struck Thelma as strange. Pamela was known for being very security conscious. She always lowered the blinds from the top to prevent prying eyes. This change in the usual pattern was a small, yet telling sign that something was amiss. Still, there was no sign of Pamela herself. The search had begun, but the first clues offered no clear answers. The family's growing panic only intensified when they realized that Pamela had not been at work. For a woman who had built a successful career as a supervising analyst at the EPA, this was another out-of-character move. Pamela had always been reliable. Her boss, colleagues, and friends alike could count on her, and her absence now left an unnerving silence. This silence, however, would soon be shattered as a more chilling discovery surfaced: the surveillance footage from the security cameras surrounding her home. It was only days later that investigators reviewed the footage, and the discovery was perplexing. The cameras had recorded Pamela returning home on Thursday, February 12th, after work, but they showed nothing else. There was no sign of her leaving the house after that. Her cars remained parked in the driveway, untouched, while her purse was still inside the home. Nothing, absolutely nothing, indicated that Pamela had stepped out. The police were stumped. Forensic teams came in, searching the house for any evidence, any trace of what could have happened to the 47-year-old woman. The security footage at first glance suggested an eerie stillness, as if time had stopped after Pamela entered her home. The investigation soon turned to her recent romantic relationship with Jose Rodriguez Cruz. Police knew he had been with Pamela in the days leading up to her disappearance. On Friday, February 13th, the day after Pamela was last seen on the footage, Rodriguez Cruz was caught on the surveillance cameras arriving at her home, carrying what appeared to be gifts. He entered her house and hours later was seen leaving, carrying a bag and a few personal items with him, but nothing seemed large enough to hold a body or anything remotely alarming. It was at this point that Pamela's brother, Derek Butler, took matters into his own hands. He was determined to find his sister, no matter where the search led. The mystery was becoming too much for him to bear, and with the police investigation proceeding slowly, Derek decided to confront Rodriguez Cruz himself. He arrived unannounced at Rodriguez Cruz's Virginia apartment, a place he had never been before. Derek, furious and confused, demanded answers. He asked Rodriguez Cruz to remove his clothing, his reasoning being to check for any scratches or signs of a struggle. Surprisingly, Rodriguez Cruz complied, though his calm demeanor only seemed to raise Derek's suspicions. But Derek was not deterred. He scoured Rodriguez Cruz's apartment, opening drawers and searching through his belongings. He was trying to provoke a reaction, something, anything that would reveal the truth. Yet in the midst of his search, he couldn't get a clear read on Rodriguez Cruz. The man seemed genuinely concerned about Pamela's disappearance, but Derek's instincts told him something was off. Still, Derek left the apartment, convinced that Rodriguez Cruz was in the clear. He couldn't shake the feeling, but at the time, there was no concrete evidence to suggest otherwise. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. The police scrutinized every detail, but there were no signs of forced entry, no clear motive, no physical evidence that could point directly to foul play. The more they searched, the more the case seemed to fall into a void. Derek, however, remained resolute. His sister was out there somewhere, and he was not going to give up until he found her. But as the weeks passed, the case grew colder, and Derek found himself the subject of suspicion. The police received anonymous tips that pointed to him as a possible suspect, and slowly, the focus shifted. Derek's involvement in a property business with Pamela became a key point of interest. Investigators learned that Pamela had been preparing to sever some of their biz ties. It seemed she had grown frustrated with Derek's management of their shared properties. Worse still, Derek was the beneficiary of her will, an unsettling fact that gave him a potential financial motive in their eyes. As more time passed without any real progress, Derek found himself increasingly under scrutiny. The police grilled him about his relationship with Pamela, questioning his every move. Derek continued to maintain his innocence, but with each new inquiry, he felt the walls closing in. He had nothing to hide, yet it seemed the authorities were convinced he was involved. For Derek, the search for his sister had now become a fight for his own freedom. The questions lingered, unanswered. What had happened to Pamela? Why hadn't she left her home? Why had her security cameras shown no signs of movement after she entered? The mystery deepened with each passing day, and the growing sense of unease spread across those who knew Pamela. There were more questions than answers, and yet, no one could make sense of it all. And as the investigation faltered, the search for Pamela continued, a dark shadow hanging over her family. What had happened in those quiet moments after she came home? And what secrets would the truth reveal about those closest to her? As the years passed, Derek Butler's determination to find justice for his sister never wavered. Day after day, he continued to search for answers, even as the investigation appeared to stall. The emotional toll on Derek was immense. Pamela had been the center of his world, and her disappearance had torn his life apart. But the growing weight of being considered a suspect by both the authorities and the public made his burden heavier. Derek was a man of conviction, unwilling to let his sister's case go cold. He pushed forward relentlessly, organizing search efforts and holding vigils in the hope that someone, anyone, would come forward with information. He continued to speak publicly, to keep his sister's name alive in the media, hoping that time would bring some clarity. His persistence was undeniable. But as each month passed without significant progress, Derek began to feel isolated. The police, once his allies, had turned their focus onto him, casting a shadow of suspicion over everything he did. The anonymous tips suggesting that Derek had a motive for Pamela's disappearance kept coming in. Family members, once supportive, began to question his involvement. Derek found himself in a fight on two fronts. He was fighting for the truth of what had happened to his sister, but he was also fighting against the ever-growing doubts that had been cast upon him. In the early days, Derek believed the police would find the truth, but as time dragged on, his frustration grew. Every inquiry into his actions felt like an invasion. He was a grieving brother, desperate to find closure, but the accusations gnawed at him. Derek's resolve was tested, but he knew that if he gave up, he would never know what had happened to Pamela. So, he persisted. At the same time, the investigation had stagnated. The police, though diligent, were unable to uncover any new leads. Rodriguez Cruz had not offered any new information, and every new tip seemed to lead nowhere. The case was growing colder with every passing month. Investigators combed through evidence again and again, but it became increasingly apparent that they were reaching the limits of what they could learn without further breakthroughs. It was at this point that the investigation turned in an unexpected direction, one that would send shockwaves through the entire case. The key to unlocking the mystery lay in Rodriguez Cruz's past. As the investigators re-examined his history, they uncovered a disturbing pattern, a pattern that tied him not just to Pamela's disappearance, but to another tragedy, one that had occurred decades earlier. Rodriguez Cruz's first wife, Marta Haiti Rodriguez, had vanished without a trace in 1989. At the time, she had been working at a psychiatric hospital in Virginia. Marta had gone missing after a tumultuous separation from Rodriguez Cruz, who was described by his family as being possessive and controlling. She had begun dating another man, and it seemed that her estranged husband could not cope with her moving on. Witnesses reported seeing Rodriguez Cruz follow Marta, watching her every move as she went about her day. Marta's disappearance was a case that had haunted law enforcement for years. Despite the eerie similarities to Pamela's case, it had remained unsolved. But now, with new eyes on Rodriguez Cruz, investigators began to connect the dots. They learned that not only had he been abusive toward Marta, but he had also been involved in a violent incident just days before her disappearance. Rodriguez Cruz had abducted Marta, holding her captive at a hotel for 2 days. There, he physically assaulted her. She eventually managed to escape, only to find that the charges against Rodriguez Cruz had been mysteriously dropped. The case had never gone to trial, and Marta's disappearance soon followed. This new information cast a dark light on Rodriguez Cruz. The disturbing patterns of his behavior, his obsessive control, his violent tendencies, and his previous victim painted a chilling picture. Was Pamela merely the latest in a long line of women who had crossed his path? Was she yet another victim of his dangerous tendencies? As the police re-examined the evidence, they couldn't help but draw the unsettling parallels between the cases. But even with this new information, the investigation continued to stall. The police had no concrete proof linking Rodriguez Cruz to Pamela's disappearance. They could not make an arrest based solely on his past history. The case, once again, began to lose momentum. The pressure to solve the case mounted, but the evidence simply wasn't there. For the investigators, it felt like an insurmountable dead end. As the years wore on, Derek found himself losing hope. He continued to fight for his sister, to keep her memory alive, but it seemed as though the truth was slipping farther away with each passing day. His public pleas for answers, his calls for justice, fell on deaf ears. The case was becoming less and less of a priority. As time stretched on, he was forced to confront the harsh reality. Would the truth ever come to light? Was he destined to live with the uncertainty forever? Meanwhile, the case was officially considered to be growing cold. The lack of new developments left the investigators grasping for answers, and the case fell further into obscurity. It seemed as though the only thing left to do was wait for something, anything, to break the silence. But time was running out. Derek's frustration was palpable. He had dedicated years of his life to finding answers, but with each failed lead, each new dead end, it felt like his efforts were in vain. He had done everything he could, But no one seemed to care about his sister's case anymore. It wasn't just the investigation that was stalling, it was his faith in the system. "I can't give up," Derek said, reflecting on the long years of search. "I owe it to her. I owe it to Pam to find out what happened." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air. Derek knew that if he didn't keep pushing, his sister would remain another unsolved mystery. But with no new developments and no clear path forward, his determination was beginning to take a toll. How much longer could he keep fighting against an unseen enemy? How many more years could he stand the unknown? In the absence of solid evidence, Derek became his own investigator. He took matters into his own hands, keeping Pam's case alive. But despite his tireless dedication, he couldn't do it alone. And as the case grew colder, the haunting feeling remained. What had happened to Pamela Butler, and why had her life been stolen so suddenly? Would anyone ever answer these questions? The years had passed, but the questions remained just as unanswered as they had been on that cold February day. Yet the investigation was not over. Not yet. There was still more to uncover, still more to learn. And as it would soon become clear, the truth was closer than anyone had thought. As the investigation trudged on, time seemed to be working against Detective Mike Fulton. The case of Pamela Butler's disappearance had become a haunting cold case, and the years without answers were weighing heavily on the team. Yet despite the passage of time, Detective Fulton couldn't shake the feeling that something had been missed, something hidden in the evidence, waiting to be uncovered. It was in the quiet moments of reflection, poring over old files and security footage, that a breakthrough began to take shape. Fulton's keen eye noticed something that had eluded the initial investigation. A subtle but significant detail in the surveillance footage that had been overlooked for so long. The scene, once seemingly mundane, now held the key to unraveling the mystery of Pamela's disappearance. The footage had already shown Pamela's return to her home on February 12th, but the question remained: why had she never been seen leaving? This was the crucial moment that had left investigators scratching their heads for years. The answer, it seemed, was hidden in the smallest of details. The blinds, which had been drawn with such precision, had been raised from the bottom, an action so out of character for Pamela. It was as if someone had intentionally manipulated the scene, creating the illusion of normalcy, while hiding the reality of what had occurred inside that home. And then, the keychain. The keychain Pamela had always carried, a simple item with personal significance, was now clearly visible in the footage. But it wasn't Pamela who was holding it. It was Rodriguez Cruz, the man who had been so close to her in the days leading up to her disappearance. The keychain, once an innocent object tied to Pamela, was now a damning piece of evidence that painted a very different picture of the relationship between her and Rodriguez Cruz. It was this discovery that reignited the investigation. What had once seemed like an open and shut case of a missing person had now become a chilling story of deception and betrayal. The suspicion that had long lingered about Rodriguez Cruz's involvement in Pamela's disappearance now had the weight of undeniable evidence behind it. Detective Fulton could feel the weight of the case shifting, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to fall into place. And so, with this newfound revelation, the investigation intensified. The police were now ready to confront Rodriguez Cruz in a way they had never done before. They had the evidence, they had the motive, and they were prepared to hear the truth. But the truth would not come easily. Rodriguez Cruz, despite his earlier calm demeanor, was now a man cornered. As the authorities approached him with the evidence, he knew the time had come. There was no longer any escaping the reality of what he had done. The confession that followed was chilling in its simplicity, and it would forever alter the course of the investigation. Rodriguez Cruz confessed to the murder of Pamela Butler. The words were deliberate, but heavy with the weight of years of deception. He explained how, after an argument, he had strangled Pamela in her own home. The brutal act had been carried out in a moment of rage, but what followed was a calculated attempt to cover up the crime. He had stuffed Pamela's body into a trash bag, raised the blinds in the manner captured by the security footage, and then disposed of her remains. The scene that had been so carefully staged now revealed its grim truth. For Derek Butler, Hearing those words, the words that confirmed his worst fears, was both a moment of horror and a strange sense of relief. The years of uncertainty, the never-ending search for answers, had finally led to this moment. Derek had fought tirelessly to find his sister, to uncover the truth, but no one could have prepared him for the emotional toll of hearing it all confirmed. "It was the best moment of my life," Derek later said, his voice heavy with the complexity of his emotions. It was the end of a long, painful chapter in his life, a chapter defined by endless searching, heartbreak, and the never-ending shadow of suspicion. At last, the truth had come to light, and Pamela's memory could begin to be honored. But even in that moment of resolution, Derek's pain was clear. The man who had killed his sister had once been someone he had trusted. The emotional complexity of that betrayal was not easily undone by the revelation alone. But the case was far from finished. As part of a plea deal, Rodriguez Cruz agreed to lead authorities to Pamela's body, hoping to provide some form of closure for her family. It was a small mercy in the wake of such a brutal crime, but one that still held the potential for justice. The detectives, along with Derek and the rest of the family, followed Rodriguez Cruz to the place where he had hidden her remains. However, the moment of closure would not come easily. When they arrived at the location, a densely wooded area near Virginia's I-95, they found that the ground had been disturbed. What was once a shallow grave was now lost beneath the expansion of the highway. The area had been paved over during an interstate expansion, and the remains were now buried under layers of asphalt. It was a haunting revelation, one that left everyone involved feeling helpless. Yet, despite the inability to recover Pamela's body, the truth had been brought to light. For Derek and his family, it was a bittersweet victory. They could no longer hold on to the hope that their loved one would be returned to them, but they had the knowledge of what had happened to her. The emotional toll of not being able to lay Pamela to rest was immense, but Derek was resolute. His sister had not been forgotten. Her story had been told. And then, as if fate had orchestrated the final twist in this tragedy, another layer of the case was uncovered. It was revealed that the remains of Rodriguez Cruz's first wife, Marta Haiti Rodriguez, had been discovered just 6 miles away from the location where Pamela's body had been hidden. The connection was undeniable, and through DNA testing, it was confirmed that the remains found in 1991 belonged to Marta. The discovery of Marta's remains was the final nail in the coffin for Rodriguez Cruz. It was no longer just the case of Pamela Butler. It was the story of a man with a pattern, a man whose history of violence and deception had been hidden for far too long. In 2019, after years of legal battles, Rodriguez Cruz was charged with the murder of his first wife, Marta. And in 2021, he was sentenced to 40 years behind bars for his crimes. For Derek, the fight for justice had not ended with the conviction of Rodriguez Cruz. His determination, fueled by years of grief and uncertainty, had brought not just one, but 2 victims the justice they deserved. And though Pamela's body could not be recovered, Derek found peace in knowing that her story had been told, and that the man who had taken her life would never harm anyone again. In the end, the years of pain, of searching and questioning, had culminated in a moment of vindication. But the price of that justice was immeasurable. In the years that followed the breakthrough in the case of Pamela Butler's disappearance, the story of a chilling pattern began to take shape. What had started as a single case of a missing woman soon became the discovery of a long-forgotten mystery, one that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Detective Mike Fulton's re-examination of the evidence had not only shed light on Pamela's tragic fate, but also unearthed the story of another woman, Marta Haiti Rodriguez, the first wife of Jose Rodriguez Cruz. Marta had vanished in 1989 under circumstances that mirrored those of Pamela's disappearance. She had been the victim of a man who had once promised to love and protect her, yet her life ended in the same tragic way. Though her body had been discovered in the early 1990s, it had never been identified, and the case had remained unsolved, shrouded in mystery. But when investigators re-examined the remains found just 6 miles from where Pamela's body had been concealed, everything changed. The discovery of Marta's identity through DNA testing not only tied Rodriguez Cruz to two separate murders, but revealed a disturbing pattern of violence and control. For Derek Butler, the journey toward justice had taken an unexpected turn. What began as a quest to find his sister had now expanded to uncover the truth about a man who had left a trail of destruction behind him. Derek had spent years fighting for Pamela, tirelessly searching for answers, and his resolve had never faltered. But now, with the revelation about Marta, Derek found himself fighting not only for his sister's justice, but for the justice of another woman who had been lost in the shadows of Rodriguez Cruz's actions. The connection between Pamela's death and Marta's disappearance was not just a matter of coincidence. It was the tragic continuation of a pattern that had been hidden from the public for far too long. Jose Rodriguez Cruz had been allowed to slip through the cracks, his previous crimes dismissed or forgotten until now. The unveiling of Marta's remains was the final piece of the puzzle, the final confirmation of Rodriguez Cruz's dark history. The man who had been so charming, so seemingly innocent, was in fact a predator with a disturbing past. A past that had been buried both figuratively and literally by years of evasion and deceit. As the case took this unexpected turn, Derek's persistence became even more critical. He had fought for years, both in the public eye and behind the scenes, to uncover the truth about his sister's fate. And now he found himself standing at the intersection of two tragic stories, each of which demanded justice. His tireless pursuit of answers had led to the unearthing of not one, but two victims of the same man. For Derek, this was not just about finding closure for Pamela. It was about ensuring that the truth was told and that Rodriguez Cruz could no longer evade responsibility for his actions. The emotional toll on Derek was immense. The knowledge that Pamela would never be truly laid to rest, her body lost beneath layers of pavement, was a heavy burden. And yet, he pushed on. His fight for justice had transcended personal loss. It had become a mission to ensure that Rodriguez Cruz was held accountable for both of his heinous crimes. And as the pieces of the case began to fall into place, Derek knew that justice for both Pamela and Marta was within reach. The final step in the journey toward justice came in 2021, when Rodriguez Cruz was convicted for the murder of his first wife, Marta Haydee Rodriguez. His conviction was the result of years of painstaking work by law enforcement and, most importantly, by Derek's unwavering persistence. It was a moment of vindication, not just for Derek and his family, but for the memory of two women who had been denied the justice they so rightfully deserved. In the courtroom, as the verdict was read aloud, Derek felt a profound sense of relief. The years of anguish, the sleepless nights, the tireless searches, they had all led to this moment. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, there was a heavy sorrow that lingered. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Derek had lost his sister, and though the truth had been uncovered, there was no bringing her back. The emotional toll was undeniable. The man who had taken her life, who had taken Marta's life, was now behind bars, but the pain of loss would remain with Derek forever. For Derek, this moment was the culmination of everything he had fought for. It was the closure he had desperately sought for so many years, but it was also a testament to his unwavering determination and love for his sister. He had never stopped fighting. He had never given up, even when it seemed as though the truth would never come to light. In the end, his perseverance had made all the difference. Rodriguez Cruz's conviction was not just a victory for Derek, but for all those who had suffered at the hands of a man who had been allowed to operate in the shadows for so long. The justice that had been denied to Marta Haydee Rodriguez in life had finally been granted in death. The painful truth had been uncovered, and the dark secrets of Rodriguez Cruz's past were now exposed for the world to see. The impact of this resolution was profound. Derek's journey had not only brought justice to his sister, but had also shed light on the long-buried truth of another woman's death. It was a moment of bittersweet victory, one that would forever change the lives of those who had been touched by these tragic events. For Derek, there was a sense of peace, but that peace was tempered by the painful realization that justice could never undo the loss of his sister. As the story of Pamela Butler and Marta Haydee Rodriguez comes to a close, we are left with the legacy of Derek's unwavering fight for justice. His journey, though painful and fraught with challenges, is a testament to the power of determination and love. Through his efforts, two victims were finally given the justice they deserved. What would you have done if you were Derek? Would you have fought as tirelessly as he did, even in the face of overwhelming odds? Let me know in the comments below.